Before we start today's episode, let me tell you about my latest adventure. Introducing Lux Coffee Co., a specialty-grade coffee company inspired by creativity and creatives. The debut range is sourced from some of the best farms in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Africa, offering beautiful flavors and notes. Our single origins and house blends are roasted every Monday for next day shipping. Visit luxcoffee.co.uk and use code PODCAST for 15% off your first order. And yes, there's exceptional merch too. Lux Coffee Co. is where art meets exceptional coffee.
I think that if we can help students understand to as much as possible, limiting time on social media is a very good idea for all of us, everyone in the whole world. But I think if we can help them understand that they are not racing against others, they are simply trying to outgrow their previously non-fitting shells. They're trying to be better than they were yesterday. If we're working towards growth and progress, not perfection, not comparison, I think that goes a very long way to reassuring them, and it feels more human. We're comparing it to lobsters, but it feels a lot more human to live that way.
Welcome to Mindful Creative Podcast, a show about understanding how to deal with the highs and lows of creative lives. My name is Radu Malinic, and creativity changed my life, but it also nearly killed me. In this season, inspired by my book of the same title, I am talking to some of the most celebrated figures in the creative industry. In our candid conversations, my guests share their experiences and how they overcame their challenges and struggles, how they learned to grow as creatives. A creative career in the 21st century can be overwhelming. I wanted to capture these honest and transparent conversations that might help you find that guiding light in your career. Thank you for joining me on this episode and taking the first or next step towards regaining control of your creative life. You ready? My guest today works as a design educator at Toronto Metropolitan University by day and is a podcaster by night. She gets creative with creatives about all things creative. She's a curious human who dabbles in a variety of printing technologies, and she currently holds the position of VP of Education on the board of directors for the RGD, Canada's largest professional association for graphic designers. In our conversation, we talk about her journey from print production to teaching, discussing her innovative approach to educating through ungrading and fostering creative confidence with an emphasis on the importance of curiosity-driven learning and redefining success beyond traditional metrics. It's my pleasure to introduce Diana Varma. Hey, Diana, it's nice to have you on the show. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
For those who may have not heard of you, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So I am Diana Varma, and I don't know, I like to use the overarching name, title, whatever, of curious human. Take that as you will. But I'm a design educator by day, a podcaster by night. I do a little of this, a little of that. I like to experiment. I like to dabble in various creative mediums, and I just try things and see how they work out. I live just north of Toronto with my family, and I work at Toronto Metropolitan University, which is formerly Ryerson University. For anyone Canadian local based, you'll recognize probably that name better than TMU, the big lengthy name of our university now. But I have the pleasure of teaching in the School of Graphic Communications Management, so I work with undergrads. And I also teach in the Master of Digital Media program. And so I work with graduate students. And it's a whole different world when you're working with mature students. It's both situations, undergrad and graduate, have their own unique opportunities and challenges. But I just love working with students and planting some of these seeds of ideas of creative confidence into their minds.
So, how did you find yourself in teaching? Was there ever a plan, or how did you get into it? What's your background?
Oh, it's a long story. I have no formal teaching education, but I have been a teacher since I can remember, and it started very young. if we're thinking about origin stories, I was a swim instructor and I started working very young as a teacher. I worked and taught at summer camp. I eventually running a small health and safety company. And so I was training all different people, all different walks of life and all different scenarios all the time. That was like my PhD in teaching was on the ground, teaching 2,500 people how to do first aid and CPR. Yeah, and then it's a winding road. But all is to say that teaching and education has been my passion informally for a long time. And thankfully, in the last 12 or 13 years, it's been my passion formally at the university level. So it's started with the single course, and then I was offered another and another, and I think up to about 90 university level courses I've taught at this point.
I like your winding road. I'm definitely here for the nonlinear stories. Where does creativity come into play with this? Because you are teaching health and safety and CPR, and you are a specialist on design and print. So you're teaching in graphics. I think it's a potentially very good background for flapping students worrying about deadlines, whereas you go, I can give you CPR if you need to.
I can come to your aid if you really need it. So I should say I do have a formal background, and my training is not in design specifically, but in print production and kind of the creative, technical, and strategic side of the communications industry, the visual communications industry. So I worked for a book printer for a number of years, and it wasn't a terribly creative job. It was in sales, I was in project management. I was working with publishers who were providing the creative assets, and we were manufacturing essentially. I had an opportunity to step out of that, step into that health and safety kind of small business that I built. And it was really for me to have my quarter life crisis and run away from the industry I had trained to be in and say, okay, what else can I try? And it was this like masterclass in creativity for me. I had full creative control of the business and who I worked with and how I communicated my wares. And it was like this teeny tiny little incubated idea that I could run with. And that was really the start of all things iterative and creative, just experimental in my approach to my work now. On this winding road, after I did that full time for a number of years, I was brought back to my alma mater where they said, hey, we need someone to help us coordinate interns. And I said, yeah, I can do that. Sure. So I did both for a time and then was offered a single course to teach and then another and another and another. And then again, over the last 12, 13, 14 years, I've really tried to ramp up my skill set in the design space, which is what I discovered. Oh, hey, I really like this. The production side is great. I find it is important to know, and it's invaluable to be able to actually know how to set up a file for print and actually print. I run a small offset press at the school I teach. But ultimately, it's the design, it's the typography, it's the creativity, it's the collaborative, collective effervescence, the communication, all of that stuff that kind of where I've found myself that really gets me jazzed.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that passion. But let's go back up even to a younger age. Like, where does the sort of love for creativity ever started?
So again, where I teach now is ultimately where I went to school. And so that program has a creative arm, but also has the technical and strategic arm. So it's funny because if we think about moments in time that are these pivotal moments where we go, oh, that's when that thing was a catalyst for the rest of the things to happen. Let's go back to high school for a second. I was in my final year of high school. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I was a drama kid. I was a band geek. I was a creative person in high school. And I really thought I wanted to get into broadcasting, media, and funny enough, do this for a living and talk in front of a camera or something for a living. And I went to an open house at the university where I eventually then went. And I was in such a bad mood. And I was like, we need to leave. And my mom said, I have taken a day off work. We spent time and money to park. You are going to see some program. Like, you are not leaving here without seeing something. And so I stumbled upon this program, Graphic Communications Management, where I ultimately found myself and secured my little spot in the world. And it was total happenstance. That day I was just pissed off, and my mom was pissed off because I was pissed off. And we just found ourselves sitting there. And Mary Black is her name. She has since passed, but she was one of the big driving forces of women in the printing industry in Canada for many, many years. And she was the chair of the school at the time. And she, within about 5 to 10 minutes, sold my desire for the program, sold my love of the world of print, and the rest is history.
Did you feel like with that encounter with Mary Black, did you all of a sudden start seeing the world in through a different pair of eyes? Because now you start seeing the technicalities of printing, like you start seeing the editorial design. How was that change for you? Because obviously I'm hoping you're no longer pissed off because you were loving the course. You got your lead in person there. And how did that change your view of everything? Because it must have had some effect on you.
I think she was just, as you can see from my little sign back here, be a badass. Mary Black was just like a real badass. And she single-handedly built the building that I now work in, which is wild. Like, she sat at the time in the 90s, a group of an all-male board of directors down and said, listen, we need your money. I need your money. We need $10 million. Figure it out. It's going to happen. You're going to make it happen. Let's do this. And so she just always had that presence in a room and knew how to command a room in a way that I was like, I didn't know this was a thing. And so, like, her leadership and her kind of watching the way she moved through the world was inspirational for sure. Yeah.
I think some of that be badass attitude definitely rubbed off on you because you seem to have that sort of get-go and that sort of pizzazz. So this is interesting. So you talk about being a band geek and you wanted to be in media. Did you always feel confident? Always feel I've got it? Because you don't come across as an introvert.
No, I'm probably not an introvert. I would say, though, if we're thinking of introversion and extroversion as where you get your energy versus feeling confident on stage or something like that, or in front of people, I think I'm probably an ambivert. I'm probably somewhere in the middle where I need human connection to re-energize myself, but at times I also need time by myself to re-energize. But in terms of confidence, I'd like to think that I've been confident for a long time. I don't know. I feel like it would be really interesting to see video footage of myself from 20 or 25 years ago to answer that question. I always felt myself very capable in the sense that everything is figure outable. So maybe from that perspective, yes. And just doing new things has always been an adrenaline rush. And so I think it's fear over trying something new and failing. I would rather try something new and fail than not do it at all.
That's a good way of seeing it. Yeah. It's an interesting way. Like what you said, like confident from a young age. It sounds fantastic about going and following where you want it to be. So you're on this course, you get into the world of print, you start seeing the world of design and creativity in a totally different way. Was there any pivotal publications you've seen or something like that piece of creativity that you've come across and you were like, oh, that makes perfect sense. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to get into.
Thinking back to high school, I remember thinking I would love to work for a magazine. And I don't know why I thought that, but growing up in the 90s as a teenage girl, my walls were plastered with cutouts of magazine and collage. And that was just something that was such an expression of my identity as a Backstreet Boy loving 13-year-old in the 90s. But no, I think I always had this inkling that I love the tactility of paper, and I was always a crafty kid. So my mom desperately wanted me to love Barbie. I had the most beautiful Barbie accessories. I wanted nothing to do with them. I just wanted crayons or markers and paper. That's all I wanted. I could never draw. I'm not an illustrator, but I would create things. I would be able to take that raw material and be endlessly thrilled by paper, which is the exact same way I exist today.
Tell me about your way through a printing press. How did you get to know all of the intricate nature of actually getting something on press and making it sure that you've set up your file okay and do your work okay?
Yeah. So again, I was very fortunate to be in this weird niche unicorn of a program where we were taught that. We're not taught to be designers. We're not taught just to be business people, entrepreneurs, but we were taught to understand the process how to actually set up a file, how to make sure that we're thinking through basically finishing with the end in mind is what we like to say, right? So thinking all the way back through the workflow. And that included like actually working with our hands on an offset printing press and using digital technology and exploring all different kind of ways in which stuff gets printed. So I think for me, thinking about what that kind of pivotal piece might have been, I think it was later when I was in my internship and ultimately where I worked at the book printer who I worked for. And it was just seeing kind of the volume and variety and way in which the sausage is made, the way in which the books are made, the way in which these giant presses and this kind of manufacturing workflow all came together. And to tie in teaching, it became my very favorite thing. I was the person who gave the tours. A client came in, they wanted a tour, they wanted to understand the process. I would walk them through the facility and passionately point out the presses. So I think that was, again, a gateway or a marrying of kind of all of these little breadcrumbs that were being left by my past self converging and coming together in new ways that would then see me 15, 20 years in the future. Doing this, having fun, being weird.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like more support and information on your creative journey, you can pick up one of my books to help you do just that. My titles cover branding, graphic design, illustration, all the way to career business advice with ideas how to navigate the highs and lows of the creative process. You can pick up signed paperbacks at no extra cost from my store at novemberuniverse.co.uk, and we are shipping worldwide. Use code PODCAST for extra 10% off your order, and you can find the links in the show notes. Any day should be a new book day. How much of fun was it for you to actually be getting to really to understand the basics of typography? You talk passionately on your podcast and your guest podcast about typography. Like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pronounce the word. Encyclopedic knowledge of typography, like how it should be set and stuff, because you don't pick it up on day 1 or 2. You really have to be curious about this and you want to know that, because I think that magical part about being a designer is like half of it's aesthetic and half of it's basically rules that you can't move. We all want to break rules. There are certain things you can't break. So what was your journey from absorbing this world of books and, as you said, volume and diversity and all of that? What was that like?
Yeah, it was great. It was so much fun. Actually, it's really funny. So later, as I worked there for a few years and I was in sales, the two genres of books that, for whatever reason, attracted clients that produced these, but I would get a stack of books hot off the press on my desk to be then mailed to like as samples to clients or whatever. But it was always Harlequin romance novel-esque things, very racy covers. I don't even know. There was some interesting titles that landed on my desk, and then children's books. So it was like this wonderful, ridiculous mix of things that I got to work on. I don't know. I'm still learning. I'm always learning. There's so much incredible visual, printed, digital communication out there, particularly with books. Books are where I started and where I still find the most joy and love and passion in the world of print. But there's just so much to take in that I'm learning all the time. So I don't know that it was one kind of pivotal point or one process. It's just like this curiosity that you've talked about too, is just always being like, oh, what is that? Oh, I've never seen that before. Oh, I wonder how they did that. And it all builds and grows and is this continuous iterative process. Many of my students think about their education in very finite 4-year windows. And then once they leave, they have their education. And you're laughing because it's just, you're always learning. It's always, you're having to fill in gaps in your own knowledge. You're having to problem solve. You're having to, I don't know, come up with new and interesting ideas. And so all of that requires learning. I can tell my students like, hey, love what you're learning. Figure out a way to learn in a way that you love, because you're going to be doing this for a long time. So I think it's constant, it's cumulative, it's curiosity fueled.
You said it feel like a finite time to learn of those 4 years. And the more I look back, the reason why I was laughing, because when I wanted to be a rock star when I was 16, I'm like, I'm not even going to go to college. I'm like, whatever. And then you get to a bit older age, you're like, you get your bits about yourself. You're like, maybe I should do something. Maybe I'll sober up and do something sensible, because maybe I won't be a rock star. And when you get to a later age, you're like, oh my God, life is amazing. There's so much to learn every day. And you can go for myself, certified curious idiots to mastermind ready. And when you get to your 40s, you can go from an idiot to mastermind ready in 2 months, because it's there and you actually have that sort of more space in your life to actually do it. Whereas I do a lot of talks for a university, and bless them, they're like, oh, really? And how do I do this? And how do I do that? I'm like, have you actually tried to make it? No, I haven't yet. And I'm like, is it a really wrong time for us to be actually trying to learn something when we feel maybe so confused about the world and life, especially in later teenage years? What's your opinion on that? Is it the right time to learn stuff? Or is it just the type of personalities?
Oh, I have so much to say. I think you've struck a chord. I think that there's never a wrong time to learn. I think you have to be in the right headspace to want to learn about a given subject area. There's never going to be an optimal time. But what I will say is one of my very favorite, most influential kind of thought leaders in education, who is Sir Ken Robinson. So he talks about the idea that children are born creative, but the creativity is worked out of them. Creative thinking is worked out of them as we get older and more serious, and things are regimented and there's rules and whatever else comes into play. So I think that for me, in the way I try to approach education for undergraduate students and graduate students, is through this kind of exploratory lens. I see it as my job not to teach them necessarily this big chunk of information that they're going to carry with them in this heavy backpack that they'll carry through life. They'll forget stuff. If you're not using a lot of the tools and techniques and whatever, you'll forget it. But what I do want to hopefully have them take with them is curiosity. Like, I've sparked something where they go, oh, yeah, I want to learn about this more on my own for my own good reasons. And I think if we can do that as educators, keeping someone excited about a given topic, giving them pathways for further exploration, giving them something to leave with where they go, huh, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. I think that is the true goal of my own kind of educational journey. And I used to, like 12, 13, 14 years ago, when I started teaching courses at the university level, I was terrified. I was, speaking of confidence, I had to stand up there and at least pretend like I looked like I knew what I was doing. But I was really, truly only about, 4, 5, 6 years older than the people I was speaking to. I guess where I'm going with this is, with time, I have learned to relax the way I teach and my approach to teaching so that it is all about the curiosity. I hope they learn things. I hope we're working towards learning objectives. We're doing all of the academically rigorous things, but I hope they leave with a curiosity for the subject matter. Whereas 12, 13 years ago, I was doing it by the book. I was approaching education the way I had been taught. The only ways I knew, it was much more serious. It was much less gray, much more black and white. And so I think, I don't know if I've answered your question at all, and we've gone on another roundabout journey, but I don't think there's a bad time to learn. And I do think there are ways in which we can help facilitate learning that are more impactful than other ways.
I think that's a very good answer. I think, yeah, there is no such thing as a bad time to learn. I think, especially when you've got your fullest potential to actually take on as much information as you can at that younger age. But what you said quite beautiful, like, how do you get them curious about stuff? Because I think it's easy to be distracted by life, especially when you are first time away from home, like you're tapping into some freedoms. And the students I've seen who do really well are the students who really went there to teach and say, like, okay, I'm going to say no to all the temptations and actually focus on being the best I can be. There's the paradox of, oh, the universities, they don't teach software skills, they don't do this, they don't get us ready for employment. I'm like, Yeah, I've seen people come out of university who are like so employable that there's like a 5 different agency were trying to get them. But that person spent pretty much every minute of their waking life within the university actually teaching themselves how to be really, really good. And that kind of makes me think of concept of creative athletes. When you got an athlete who wants to be really, really good, you can't just say, hey, you know what? I'll make you a bit curious about this. What can I do? How can I do it? Like sometimes you actually need that conviction and that sort of waking that up and someone's showing them that there's a way to do it, because that might not always be as clear to them. Because as you said, through beautiful explanation from Ken Robinson, sometimes when you get to that university level, like you might have not been in an encounter with people who were curious and actually wanted you to be the best possible version of yourself. So I do like that you say you want to get them be curious. Can you make a person be curious if they're not?
Absolutely. Understand your audience, know what they're interested in. And there's always, I shouldn't say always, but there's oftentimes, especially in the world of visual communications, typography, design, what have you, there's gateways into people's curiosity. So I think part of that is understanding the students in front of you and understanding what they really enjoy, understanding their kind of lived experiences and building bridges for those to be curious.
Tell me more about how you build your bridges. I'm curious about building bridges.
Oh man. One thing I've done recently, I mean, I've done for a long time, but I've done more formally recently, is I teach classes that are probably anywhere between 25 to 90 students in a classroom at the same time. And I make a really important point. I don't know everyone's name, but I make it a point to learn names. And I think that silly, simple, seemingly obvious answer, which is to learn names and you will get buy-in and you will be able to start building bridges, has been so important and so fundamental to building trust in the classroom, which then allows me to better understand them and build bridges through conversation, through exercises or assessments with lots of choice, right? So, choice in their subject matter that they explore. So, for example, I teach a magazine making course, and students get to choose what kind of magazine they want to make. It's completely up to them. And all of a sudden, you get this like massive buy in, this massive curiosity when they can see, oh, the skills that you are trying to teach me, I can apply to this thing that I love. Okay, I'm in. So, that offering to students an opportunity, I always call them invitations. Like, I am inviting you to do this project. Nothing is mandatory. It's your decision how you want to move through this course and ultimately the grade that you want to achieve and whatever else. But it's finding those opportunities to make each course and each assessment feel as personal as possible to each student, even in large classes.
You must have seen quite huge differences or development in education in the last 14 years. What would you like to see in the future, in the next 14, 15 years? What would you like to see changing? If you had any freedom to influence the education even further, what would you do?
I know exactly what I would do, and I'm trying to actively do it, although there are constraints in the system that is the university, and I understand why, but I would get rid of grades. Grades suck. I think in many cases, a hindrance to learning for intrinsic reasons. It's very easy to get caught up in the trap of grades. And if we go back to my origin story again in my beginnings, I was a good student. I was top of my class, but I knew how to, I don't want to say work the system because I feel like I was learning. I was an engaged student. I was enthusiastic, whatever. But I could pick up on those details and I could really gamify school and get the grades that I wanted to get. And I think that if I had different systems in place, I think I would have even been more motivated. I would have explored in different directions. I would have gotten even more out of the experience rather than having my worth determined by the work that I do and the grade that I get. So I'm a big believer in decoupling this world of work and worth, which often is expressed through grades in a not so helpful way, I believe.
I think that's definitely a valid way of seeing the future. But would it in any way it be potentially a hindrance to their future? Like, because you go into the world that's paying you almost accordingly how good you are or how clever you are or how clever you can go around a system and cheat the system. Because unfortunately, the end product is as good you are, you're going to be potentially paid better. If you're not good, but you know how to sell yourself, you can still get paid really well. But if you're not very good or you can't sell yourself, would that then be a sort of soul crashing existence to go, actually, yeah, I was not prepared for this?
So I think there's certainly a difference between not being graded at all and being graded in a way that doesn't conform to traditional methods, which I think maybe is more along the lines of what I'm suggesting. I don't think it should be feedback is incredibly important. So, just to give you kind of the background of where I'm coming from, I use something called specifications grading in much of my courses. What that looks like is we have a set of competencies. For example, for a given project, it needs to be this word length, it needs to cover off these 3 things we learned in class, and it needs to be submitted by this date and time. And as long as you've met those 3 criteria, or however many, whatever they are, then you get the check mark and you're given lots of feedback along the way. So, what this type of system does, the idea is you can try, you can take risks. You don't have to worry about going the safe route to get an A. You can do something weird and wacky and experimental so long as you're still checking off those competencies. And so, what I've found is that the academic rigor of work that is submitted is still very high. Like, no one's trying to cheat the system and just maybe there's 1 or 2 that try and skirt by and they're like, oh, I can get away with this. But what happens is students go, oh, I can do whatever I want so long as I conform to these 3 things. Okay. And all of a sudden, there's this intrinsic motivation that takes flight and this curiosity that they are able to work within. And it takes the stress of grades off. I'm not suggesting that we have no grades, no feedback. We just go through school and come out the other end and hope for the best. I think there still needs to be curriculum. I think there still needs to be very strategic kind of intention behind the courses and the way we structure education. But ultimately, I don't think, especially in creative work, looking at 2 pieces that both are in response to the same creative brief, are both inherently interesting, are both solving the problem, and saying this one's an A and this one's a B is helpful to students. I think lots of feedback, and yes, you've done the checkmark item, therefore you're working towards whatever grade you want in the course, is a much more human way to move through a system.
Everything you're describing, it's an incredible sort of toolkit for unleashing their potential. You're looking into people like how do you get them actually set up the right way for their future? Because how important part of this is actually looking after people's confidence. How do you build their confidence? Because you talk about feedback and done right way, you talk about specific grading, that kind of stuff. That's very sort of mindful way of actually going about it, that we working with the people in the right way and get them unstuck and show them on the right path straight away. So when did you become aware that confidence is quite a huge part of this and the way how it can be taught is actually possible to do it in your way that's more mindful and more human and more compassionate in a way?
Yeah. So there's a really great book. It's called Specifications Grading. And I don't even remember how I came across this book. But since then, this kind of world of what's called ungrading, which is a framework for rethinking traditional grading structures. And ungrading is on a scale from like traditional grading all the way through to what I do, which is in the middle, to a fully self-assessed course, which is full ungrading. But I think as soon as I started to dive into this, I went, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Oh my gosh, there's so much potential here. Oh my gosh, why are we pigeonholing students into these traditional grades for each and every project that they do when it's not necessary? And so then I tried, of course, then it was this wonderful creative exercise for myself to try and figure out how to do this in a system that requires a final grade at the end of the semester. And so it's been like this puzzle to figure out how to do this. And since I've started and experimented since about 2018. Now I'm teaching almost all of my courses use a form of ungrading, but it's been this kind of wonderful evolution and figuring out and going, okay, that worked this time. Maybe I'll try this next time. And I've seen students' enthusiasm and confidence grow in ways that I did not even anticipate when I first dipped my toes in the water 6 years ago.
You used the word I wanted to ask you about. What happens when creativity meets confidence?
Everything happens. I think when creativity meets confidence, we are less afraid to try. We're less afraid to fail. We're less afraid of the final result and much more in tune with the process. I'm at a point now in my own kind of creative practice and my own teaching practice. I should keep this to creative practice, but to say that the final result, whatever I'm making, whether it's a podcast episode, whether it's some sort of book project, whatever it is, the actual final result is a small sliver of the reason I'm doing it. So it's maybe 5-10% of why I'm doing it is that final result. And the 90 or 95% of the value I get out of doing something is in the journey, is in the process, is in the figuring out, is who I'm becoming as I'm figuring it out. And so, yeah, I think that ability to decouple work and worth is critically important and so empowering when it comes to confidence and creativity. I am not what I create. I am me. That's cool. Nothing's going to change that. If something's an absolute flop, so be it. If something's incredible, so be it. The final result has much less power over me than maybe it used to.
It's music to my ears. I get it. But when you talk to students and you actually tell them that 90% of this is the journey and the end product is the sliver of your efforts, how difficult can it be sometimes to actually instill that idea that it's a continuous journey? Because we want to be sometimes validated as we go along. Sometimes like you want to be reassured you're doing the right thing, but sometimes things don't fall into place until the last minute. Like most creative projects are a battleground, battlefield building site, and like it's delivered. And I think there was a creative morning talk by someone who was saying like, there's no point of talking about happiness and creativity because most of the time no one's happy. And then it comes together. So do we crash their dreams at the beginning or do we actually prepare them for the future?
That's a good question. Giving students opportunities to fail, and when we talked last, I used this terminology as well, but the lowercase f fail versus the uppercase F fail, giving them as many opportunities to do that as possible makes them better understand, oh, this is okay. I can fail and I'm still here and I'm still figuring it out and everything is iterative and quantity equals quality and I'm just going to keep trucking along and doing my thing. So I don't know. I think that comes with time. I think I can plant the seeds and set up my assessments and my grading structure and exercises and workshops and all of the things to try and plant those seeds, but ultimately they'll figure it out with time. Or maybe they won't, but I can only do so much to plant that in there and they have to embody and figure it out for themselves, which is both easy and difficult watching that happen.
I can definitely agree with that. I can definitely see that how it can be absolutely both. But how do you see the modern creativity in a world that I feel is hyper-connected? We live in a hyper-connected world where we can see how some people might be more talented, more successful, more attractive because we're not seeing the world through the little squares. It's set up for us to fail in a way. Like we said, fail. You're not going to look at Pinterest or Instagram or something else. You're like, I feel so great about myself because everyone's more talented. Everyone's already doing things and I am not. And to actually reassure yourself that you actually live in your own life, in your own journey, and you are potentially at the starting point and you're seeing people like 20 years down the line can be potentially so confusing because like, how do you get people to understand that and accept it and actually get them to slow down? Because yours and my journey, 20 years, more than 20 years of like actually finding, failing, discovering, we say failing, like getting things wrong. We didn't fail because we're still here. We're doing still the same thing. But does it feel now that there's more pressure to be something or someone much quicker than we did?
I think so. I have to ask you though, Radam, do you know about lobsters?
No specialist.
Nor am I, but I'm curious. I was curious. I am curious. So lobsters, they never stop growing. And a lobster, as I understand it, will grow until their shell quite literally does not fit anymore. And then they will shed that shell. They will be vulnerable because they have no shell and they're just this like fleshy bit of meat floating around at the bottom of the sea. So they will crawl into a dark place until they're, I don't know, is it an exoskeleton? Oh boy, my biology knowledge is failing me. But their shell grows back and it now fits. And then they go back out into the world and they do their thing. They keep growing. And all of a sudden they have to shed their next shell. And they keep this cycle, this ebbing and flowing of growth and then replenishment or retreat to grow their new shell. And then when they're ready, they go back out into the world. I think that if we can help students understand to as much as possible, limiting time on social media is a very good idea for all of us, everyone in the whole world. But I think if we can help them understand that they are not racing against others, they are simply trying to outgrow their previously non-fitting shells. They're trying to be better than they were yesterday. If we're working towards growth and progress, not perfection, not comparison, I think that goes a very long way to reassuring them. And it feels more human. We're comparing it to lobsters, but it feels a lot more human to live that way.
I'm here for such analogies. I absolutely love it. I think that's a really good knowledge of actual lobsters because I was nowhere near that knowledge of lobsters. So you are well ahead when it comes to that. But I think what you really beautifully described is actually redefining success. Like knowing what success means, it means different things to different people. When someone asks me the question, what's your success? I'm like, I don't have to go back to my first shitty job. Every time I wake up, I don't have to go back to that job. That's my success. So as part of the education, as part of setting someone on their lifelong success and journey, is there exercise that you do? Like, how do you define success?
I think redefining success or simply defining success for ourselves is critically important because if we don't define it for ourselves, others, society, capitalism, all the things will define it for us. And so, one of my very favorite exercises that I should probably do more often for myself, and I sometimes do for my students, is to do just that, is to think about, okay, if success is not just about the outputs in this world, and it's also, for a second, just humor me, it's also about the inputs. What would success look like? So, if you could think about success in terms of inputs, what words come to mind or how might you define success? So, for example, for me, it is that curiosity piece. If I'm curious about something, if I'm excited, if I have that like guttural, ooh, this could go somewhere feeling, working on a project that does that for me is absolutely success right out the gate.
Okay, I can see that. It's very similar here, but thinking about freedom of opportunity, like just being able to do whatever you like. I feel like I'm so privileged that success is that I've invented something that didn't exist in my world, not necessarily out there, because most of the things we do and make is recycle of the things that were here in the past. But it's like I can create my own version of tomorrow. And that to me is already success today because tomorrow is going to be something different than today was. So that would be potentially my input. I wasn't prepared for this.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that's great. Another thing that I really like to do, speaking about comparison, is I like to do an exercise that I call creative cousins. And so it's looking out into the world, not comparing apples to apples or our work to someone else's work who maybe has been at it for a million years, but it's to look for people who are really living creative lives that we appreciate and that we go, oh, I would love to live that creative life 10, 20, 30 years from now. And figuring out who those people are and then trying to attach words to why we appreciate them, why we value their creative lives. So, for example, this is one of mine, RuPaul Charles. Love RuPaul's Drag Race. I think that he's a brilliant creative and a brilliant entrepreneur. And so, what do I really like about his work? I love the fact that it is experimental. I love the fact that he's always trying new things and it has his kind of hands in different places in the media industry. I appreciate that he is very direct in the way that he communicates, right? All of these different kind of keywords. And then if you start to build this mind map of creative cousins and you start to associate words with each of them, you'll find patterns. You'll find ways in which creative people who you admire are living their lives authentically out in the world. And the words that you associate, you can start to build into your own definition of success. So maybe, again, for me, I know that having done that exercise before, experimenting, curious, play, all of these critical things, if I'm working on projects and I am engaged in life in those ways, I feel successful, no matter, irrespective of the outcome.
I like it. I think it's very clever. I think what you've quite eloquently described, like creative cousins, it's less about that mythical checkpoint in your sort of potential success, because you can feel that the world sometimes is a bit unfair. Like, how do I get that opportunity? Like, when is the opportunity going to come across my path? Okay, so I'm sure that RuPaul managed to create lots of their opportunities by being who they are, like actually trying to nourish and guide their path, because it sometimes can feel like, oh, is there someone's manager making this, or is there management team? Is there someone making this happen? But we are both true testaments of actually there is a ways to actually just follow your curiosity and build your building blocks on top of it, or you just even forward, just build that path and follow it, because it will unravel. I think that's been a beautiful learning from this creative life, that less you rely on other people to make something for you, and the more you make for yourself, all of a sudden realize, oh shit, people are now asking me how I've done this. I was like, I just went forward and asked and knocked on the door. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at this, like creative cousins. Is there anybody else apart from RuPaul that is your creative cousin?
Ooh, I'm sure there is. My kids are kind of my creative cousins because I see the way that they approach their work and the way that they just grab the scissors, grab the piece of paper and start cutting and see where the heck it lands. And my 5-year-old yesterday, she was calling for me at bedtime. She was supposed to be asleep, but naturally had a pair of scissors in bed and paper. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's making a snowflake. But her snowflake didn't quite turn out the way she wanted it to. She opened it up and it turned into like this, almost like a Batman mask. She's like, look, I made a mask for you. And so it was she didn't miss a beat. It wasn't like, oh, I failed. I didn't make a snowflake. No. I made a mask. This is cool. And so I think that type of willingness to just jump right in and not know how to do something, but figure it out experientially is another bit of success, or something that I would want to try and continue to emulate in my creative practice. And I see my kids doing that.
There's a great sort of philosophy in jazz music that they say that every mistake is an opportunity, because it's such a flowing rhythm and obviously a flowing process that sometimes maybe we just reel to the hard stop just because we just didn't get to the right turning very quickly, or just start doubting ourselves. And when you flow and open, when you turn the snowflake in a Batman's mask, every mistake's an opportunity. This is how that can be easily unlocked. And sometimes I think it's that sort of conflicting, unguarded thoughts that trip us up, because I may have told you that on your show, that I believe that there's no such thing as a creative block now. Like, creative block doesn't exist. It's just conflicting thoughts. Like, we just overthink it. Because if you were to stop and filter just a couple of thoughts, look at your mind map and, okay, this is where I start. This is how I get there. This is almost like your map. How do you get from A to B? And this is how it could work. So yeah, I like that you said that your kids are your creative cousins, because my kids are the same age. And yeah, sometimes that's styling out of a mistake is brilliant. Like, you just do this. What did you mean to do? That. Did you really mean to make that? Absolutely. It's not something we can do in a branding proposal meeting. Or what did you do? That's what I meant to really do. But speaking of mistakes, you mentioned that you were sending out a romance and kids books in your sales jobs. Did you ever get it wrong? Did you send a romance book to a kid, or to a child publisher, and a kid book to a hot romance customer?
I don't think I ever did that. No, I definitely didn't do that. But no strange mix up. Although one of my very favorite things to do, just jumping back there for a second, was we had in-house coatings. So if you imagine the front of a book cover that has like a spot UV gloss in one part of the cover coating, we did all of that in-house. And so one of my very favorite things to do, I did not get to do it very often for the Harlequin romance novels, but I got to do it often for the kids' books, is actually do a glitter approval. So I got to approve how much glitter was on the cover. And it was like the most enthralling thing that a client would call me and be like, all right, we need you to go do this glitter check. I'm on it. And yeah, no mix-ups, but lots of fun and frivolity working with those two categories.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. A glitter check is not something that many people can say. What's the success of your life? I had a lot of glittery conversations about how much glitter is enough glitter for a book cover.
And they would pour it in and I'd more glitter and pour it in more. We need more glitter. It was a fun time.
That's fantastic. Diana, I can truly thank you. It was enlightening, it's inspirational, and I think what you're doing is remarkable. And I think your energy for your curiosity, your passion for the curiosity is something to cherish. So thank you. And yeah, I wish you all the best on your journey, because I think your students are lucky to have you.
Thank you so much, Radam. It's been really, really fun. And I hope we can connect again soon. This has been great.
Me too. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of Mindful Creative Podcast. I'd love to know your thoughts, questions, or even suggestions, so please get in touch via the show notes or social channels. This episode was produced and presented by me, Radin Malinic. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil McKay from 7 Million Bikes Podcast, and the theme music was written and produced by Jack James. Thank you, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Hey, just a quick note to say thank you for joining me on this episode. If this is your first time or you're a regular listener, please take a minute and rate the show on your chosen platform. A short review helps every show to be more visible to new listeners and provide them with value. So thank you for helping out. Thank you.